In this video, we'll be discussing Calvary's Title IX policy. Our Title IX policy is based on the federal civil rights law from 1972 that prohibits discrimination on the basis of sex and gender in education. Here at Calvary, all students, employees, guests, and visitors are protected under Title IX. And under this policy, all forms of gender and sex-based discrimination, including sexual harassment, sexual assault, domestic violence, dating violence, and stalking, are strictly forbidden. We also believe that all community members have the right to be free from these actions. This is important because actions that violate this right undermine the basic principles of biblical teaching that we emphasize here at Calvary. It also violates our community standards and often violates the law. Here at Calvary, such actions are not and will not be tolerated. It should be noted how Title IX fits in with the rest of the policies here at Calvary University. In both our student and employees' handbooks, we have a number of different policies that we expect our community members to abide by. Title IX is a policy within a set of policies. This is important and means just because you're not in violation of Title IX doesn't mean you're not in violation of other sections of the handbook. For example, one morning a student shows up in front of the education building and they set up as students are walking by and they give the hottie rating to every girl that walks past. Now, that is Title IX, that is gender-based misconduct, and will be pursued under the Title IX policy. But let's say that same student shows up, sets up, and as students are walking by, instead they give both genders the hottie rating. At that point, they are an equal opportunity harasser, and therefore it is not covered under Title IX. However, that does not mean they're not subject to other policies and punishments and procedures that we have in our handbook, which we will pursue, and we make sure that that kind of behavior is not happening here at Calvary. Also, as we continue throughout this video, we'll be talking about consent a lot, and consent to sexual activity specifically. This is part of the Title IX discussion, which, remember, is just a little part of the broad policies that are in place at Calvary. So just because in this video I say before you pursue sexual activity you need to have consent, does not mean that that same activity with consent will not violate other policies here at Calvary. If you have questions on what those policies are, or any of those policies or these policies, I encourage you to go ahead and ask me or read the student handbook and employee handbook, or whichever is applicable to you. Those are available on Calvary's website, calvary.edu. If you have any questions about what qualifies and what doesn't, why certain things are in different policies, please ask me or read any of those policies that are in the handbook. They should help you gain an understanding of those. So, let's talk about some important definitions in Title IX. Sexual misconduct is simply any unwelcome conduct that effectively denies someone access to their educational program or that constitutes violation of one of the following 5 areas. The first misconduct violation is sexual harassment. Sexual harassment is kind of the umbrella policy under which all the other 4 that we're going to discuss fall. This is conduct on the basis of sex, where at least one of the following occurs. An employee provides a Calvary service based on an individual's participation in a sexual act, otherwise known as quid pro quo. There is unwelcome conduct, which is conduct that is so severe, pervasive, and objectionably offensive that it effectively denies access to an educational program or activity. Or there's conduct that constitutes sexual assault, which is dating violence, domestic violence, or stalking. Any of those 4 qualify as sexual harassment and sexual misconduct under that policy. Like we said, sexual harassment is the umbrella term under sexual misconduct. So the second sexual misconduct violation is sexual assault. Sexual assault is any sexual act directed against another person without their consent. This includes rape, which is sexual penetration without consent. Fondling, that's touching another person's private areas without consent. Incest, which is sexual intercourse between individuals who are related and not allowed to be married under the law, as along with statutory rape, which is intercourse with a person under the age of consent. The third misconduct violation is dating violence, which is violence committed by a person who has been in a romantic or intimate relationship with the victim. The fourth sexual misconduct violation is domestic violence. Domestic violence includes felony or misdemeanor crimes of violence committed by a current or former spouse or the intimate partner of the victim. It may also be domestic violence if it is between people that are living together, along with other similar qualifiers. And the final sexual misconduct violation is stalking. Stalking is conduct directed at a specific person that makes them fear for their safety or suffer substantial emotional distress. Sexual harassment takes many forms and can simply be making sexual jokes at a time when it's not wanted or appreciated, or making unwanted sexual advances. Constantly following another community member could constitute a violation of Title IX. Leering or staring at other people, touching another's private areas without permission, kissing without consent, voyeurism, sexual activity by someone who's incapacitated, all of these things and more can qualify as Title IX violations. Now let's continue with our definitions and talk about consent. Like I mentioned before, consent is simply mutual agreement to participate in sexual activity. Consent has to meet 3 criteria, though. First and foremost, consent must be given knowingly. The individual giving consent has to know what they're consenting to and must be able to comprehend what they're agreeing to do. Secondly, it must be given voluntarily. Forced consent, or consent that's coerced out of someone, is not consent. If you've badgered someone into sexual activity, you do not have consent. Third, consent must also be given clearly. If you ask for sexual activity and the response is, "I don't know," or "maybe," or anything similar, then you don't have consent. Consent must be clearly given. A weak no is still lack of consent, and no response to a request for consent is still lack of consent. Past consent does not imply future or ongoing consent, and if you are not positive you have consent, or there is any ambiguity, uncertainty, vagueness, or doubt, then you don't have consent. When in doubt, assume you don't. Another important idea is coercion. Coercion is unreasonable pressure to engage in sexual activity. It can take many forms, including physical or emotional force, and can include intimidation, misuse of authority, persistent advances, that's where you ask and ask and ask, or even outright threats or the use of alcohol or drugs. Any of those constitute coercion and therefore a lack of consent. As I just mentioned, force, that's simply the use of physical violence or imposition to gain sexual access. It can also include threats and intimidation. There doesn't have to be physical contact for it to qualify as force, and a lack of resistance does not constitute a lack of force being used. It's also important to understand the idea of incapacity, which I mentioned earlier. Incapacity is when a person is unable to give voluntary, knowing, and clear consent. This can happen for a number of different reasons. It can happen because someone is asleep or unconscious or drifting in and out of consciousness. They may also be physically or mentally unable to give consent if any of those apply. They do not have capacity and you do not have consent. As we begin talking about reporting, we need to talk about some of the circumstances when Title IX policy applies. Not all violations of the definitions we talked about will qualify as Title IX violations, just because one of those definitions was met. There are other criteria that has to be met as well. So first and foremost, the allegation does need to meet one of those definitions, but it also has to have taken place within the United States. Any activity that took place in a foreign country is not pursuable under Title IX. Calvary also must have control over the respondent, which is simply the Title IX term for the person who committed the alleged violation. If we don't have control over the person who committed the alleged violation, we can't pursue it under Title IX. Calvary also must have control over the context of the harassment. This means it has to have taken place on campus or at a sanctioned off-campus event. Something that Calvary has sponsored would be a sanctioned off-campus event. Anything on campus or any sanctioned off-campus event. Lastly, we must have control over the complainant. The complainant is simply the Title IX term for the person who is the victim of the alleged violation. If any of these qualifications are not met, we may be able to pursue it under other policies, but it likely will not qualify as a Title IX violation. If that is the case, and we have to dismiss an allegation or report because of these things, Calvary will first seek to provide supportive help to the victim. We want to make sure that you are taken care of first and foremost. Even if we don't have control over the situation, we want to be there to help you and to get you through this. So whenever possible, we will seek to resolve the violation in other areas of policy. All of this is the basic information on Calvary's Title IX policy, and so if you have questions about any of that, I would recommend that you first read the entirety of the policy, because there's a lot of things that are given there in more detail than they are in this video. If you're curious about any of the terms or definitions, or what things qualify under which, or if you're just looking for general guidance on the policy, please don't hesitate to ask me any questions you may have. Now, I would like to change gears a little bit and talk about how to report Title IX violations. So before you file a report or bring a concern to the attention of any employee at Calvary, you need to be aware that the vast majority of Calvary employees are mandated reporters. And a mandated reporter is an individual who is required by law to inform the Title IX coordinator, myself, of possible Title IX infractions. A mandated reporter is to immediately report any and all information to the Title IX coordinator. For our employees, it is important that you understand this. Unless you've been specifically talked to, and unless your name is listed under our victim advocates, you are a mandated reporter and need to bring any suspected violations or reported violations to the Title IX office. If you wish to report something and wish to maintain confidentiality about an alleged incident, you need to know that we have offered to you other reporting options. Calvary has designated victim advocates who are not required to inform the Title IX coordinator for action when you report them. You need to understand, though, that these victim advocates are not counselors, but they are able to come alongside, support, and assist, and advise you. A victim advocate can connect you with counselors, with health professionals, or they can advise and guide you in regards to the Title IX policy if and or when you decide to file a formal complaint. If you wish to contact one of our victim advocates, please refer to the Gender-Based Misconduct Policy, or the Title IX policy, for their names and contact information. Other confidential resources that you can report to are available off-campus. This includes licensed professional counselors, medical providers, local rape counselors, domestic violence resources, local and state agencies, clergy, pastors, chaplains, and attorneys. All of those are confidential individuals who do not have to report sexual misconduct to Calvary's Title IX office. If you decide you do want to file a formal report, you may do so by contacting the Title IX coordinator. Again, that's me. When you do so, you'll be asked to submit a written and signed account of the allegation, and you can do this either in person or by email or phone. As you report and go through this process, at every opportunity, we'll work with you to make sure that you have as much control of the process as possible. There will be circumstances where we may have to make decisions about a course of action, but whenever possible, we want to honor your wishes. One of the ways we do that is when you're filing a report or bringing an alleged incident to the Title IX office, you may request that the report remain confidential. This effectively restricts Calvary's ability to investigate an allegation, but we will honor that request when we are able. If you do request confidentiality, and the allegation that you submit demonstrates a pattern of predatory behavior or violence, or involves a weapon, we will likely have to respond to that allegation, even if you requested anonymity, and that may be compromised through that investigation. You may also request that the report be handled, though, through an informal judiciary process. An informal resolution can be pursued when both parties, complainant and respondent, agree to follow this process. The informal process does not involve a full investigation and does not involve a hearing. It will likely involve mediation or some form of facilitation. The complainant, the person bringing the report forward, may also pursue a formal judiciary process. This process includes full investigation and live hearing to determine whether or not a violation has occurred. We won't cover that process's details here, but it is outlined in our Gender-Based Misconduct Policy, again, the Title IX policy available on our website. Thanks for watching this video, and we would encourage you to go through the full policy whenever you can. The sooner the better. It outlines a lot of information that we just covered briefly here and gives a lot more information as well. It also goes through a brief overview of our judiciary process, so you know what that looks like should you ever need to pursue one. There's also information there that can be very helpful, such as advice on how to be an active bystander, if you would see sexual misconduct, how to intercede and help keep other people and your fellow employees, your fellow students safe. We also have information on how to help victims of sexual misconduct and risk reduction tips so that we can all seek to be responsible with our own lives, health, and safety. Here at Calvary, we value each member of our community, and we're thankful that you're here, We believe that God has given us a tremendous opportunity to serve you. If you need help in any capacity, but especially with Title IX concerns, please let me know.